Lena Carter stood at the edge of the combat arena, her heart racing. The air was thick with tension, and she could hear the faint hum of the facility's artificial gravity system. This was it, the final trial, the one that would decide if she would pass or fail. If she would join the elite defense force, or if she would have to go back to her old life on Earth. The arena was vast, made up of metal walls and floors that could shift to create different training environments. Today, it was set up like a battlefield, with obstacles, debris, and mock weapons scattered across the ground. In the distance, she could see a few of her fellow cadets preparing for their own tests. Some were stretching while others were deep in thought, trying to calm their nerves. Lena swallowed hard and looked down at her hands. They were sweaty, trembling ever so slightly. She hated that feeling. She had worked so hard to get here. Years of training, countless hours spent in simulations, and still she couldn't shake the nervousness. She wasn't like the others. They were natural-born fighters, strong, quick, and confident. Lena had to fight for everything she had. She wasn't fast or strong, but she was determined. She knew she could do this. Her instructor, Captain Jake Hunter, stood at the far side of the arena. He was watching her closely, arms crossed. His face was unreadable, his eyes sharp and calculating. Captain Hunter was known for being tough, no harsh. He didn't care for excuses. He didn't care how hard you worked. All he cared about was results. Lena had heard the rumors about him. They said he had never once given a cadet a second chance. If you failed, you were out. Simple as that, the thought of failing made her stomach turn, but she tried to push it out of her mind. She couldn't afford to think about that now. She had to focus. "Carter," Captain Hunter's voice cut through the silence. His tone was flat, cold. "Are you ready?" Lena nodded quickly, forcing herself to stand tall. She didn't want to look weak in front of him. She didn't want him to see how nervous she was. "Good," he said before giving her a single nod. "Your trial starts now." With that, he turned and walked off, disappearing into the shadows of the arena. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had heard that the trials were meant to be unpredictable. The tests were designed to throw cadets off balance and see how they reacted under pressure. She had no idea what to expect. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, trying to keep her movement steady. Her boots clicked against the cold metal floor, the sound echoing in the empty arena. The first test, she knew, would be a simple one, navigation through the battlefield. She had done this 100 times in simulations, but this was different. This was real. As she moved forward, the arena began to shift. The floor rumbled slightly, and the walls began to change, rising up to create walls of debris. The familiar layout of the arena transformed into a maze. Lena's eyes scanned the environment. The walls were tall and jagged, and there were broken crates scattered everywhere. This was designed to test her ability to think on her feet, to make quick decisions. She crouched low, moving slowly and carefully through the maze. She didn't want to make any noise. There was always the possibility of someone or something watching her. That's what the simulations taught her. Always assume you're being watched. Always assume the worst. She reached a small corner and paused, her heart pounding. She could see one of the other cadets ahead of her, moving carefully through the maze. Lena bit her lip, trying to decide what to do. Should she try to catch up to him? Should she wait and see what he did next? She had been taught to be aggressive, to take advantage of every opportunity. But in this test, she wasn't sure if that was the right choice. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud sound. It was distant, but it was enough to make her freeze. A blast of energy, followed by the unmistakable crack of an explosion. Her instincts kicked in. She ducked behind a wall, pressing herself against the cold metal surface. She didn't know what was going on. Was it part of the test? Were they under attack? Seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. She risked a glance around the corner. There was nothing in sight. No enemies, no explosions, just the eerie silence of the arena. Lena felt a chill crawl down her spine. She tried to shake it off. Focus, she told herself. She needed to finish this test. Moving cautiously, she advanced deeper into the maze. Every corner, every shadow felt like it held danger. Her mind raced, analyzing every possible outcome, every possible threat. She knew that in real combat there would be no second chances. You couldn't hesitate. She finally reached a clearing in the maze, and there, standing in front of her, was a massive target. It was a part of the test, a simulated enemy. The target had no face, no features, just a large humanoid figure made of metal and synthetic material. Lena had been prepared for this. She had trained for it, practiced in simulations. Her pulse quickened as she approached the target. She knew that if she could disable it, she would pass this part of the trial. But something was wrong. The target wasn't moving. It was still. It wasn't reacting to her presence like it should have. She took another step forward, feeling a strange sense of unease. There was something off about this entire trial. The silence was too much, too heavy. Normally, there would be sounds, commands, feedback, the hum of the training machines. But here, there was only the sound of her breathing, the rush of blood in her ears. Suddenly, the target's eyes lit up with a bright red glow, and before she could react, a loud voice boomed from the speakers overhead. "You failed, Carter." The voice was cold, emotionless. It sounded almost robotic. Lena froze, her heart stopping. She didn't know what to say, what to do. She hadn't failed. She had done everything right. She had navigated the maze. She had found the target. But now the test was over, and she hadn't even realized it. She heard footsteps behind her and turned quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. But there was nothing there. Only Captain Jake Hunter, standing motionless at the edge of the arena. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what had just happened. Why had the target shut down? Why had she been told she failed? Jake's eyes were locked on her, but his face showed no emotion. He didn't speak at first, just watched her with that same unflinching gaze. "You failed," he repeated, his voice low and flat. Lena's chest tightened. It wasn't the words that bothered her, it was the way he said them. There was something off about the entire situation. Something wasn't right. She opened her mouth again to protest, but before she could say anything, something strange happened. The entire arena, every wall, every piece of debris seemed to flicker. For a moment, it was as though the world itself had stopped. Everything became still, frozen. And then she saw it. The instructors, the other cadets, and even Captain Jake Hunter, they weren't moving. They were standing perfectly still like statues. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Something had gone wrong, something far worse than just failing a test. The air was thick with tension, and Lena realized, with a sudden shock, that the trial had just become something much more dangerous than she had ever expected. Lena stared at the frozen instructors in disbelief. The arena, once filled with the sounds of the trial, was now eerily silent. The walls, the debris, everything around her was still. No one moved, not a single sound. She could barely hear her own breath, but the feeling of dread crawling up her spine was loud and clear. Captain Jake Hunter stood in front of her, but he was motionless, his face locked in the same stern expression as before. His arms were still crossed, and his eyes were fixed on her, though they didn't seem to be seeing anything at all. It was like the world had been paused, and only Lena was left to figure out what had gone wrong. A cold chill ran down her back. She felt the panic rising in her chest, but she knew she had to keep it under control. Panic wouldn't help her now. She needed to think. She had to stay calm. She took a cautious step forward, her boots making a soft click against the metal floor. The silence was suffocating. Her eyes darted from one instructor to another, searching for any sign that they were still alive. But they weren't moving. They weren't breathing, they weren't blinking. It was as if they were just statues. Lena's heart began to race. What was happening? Was this part of the trial? Was this some sort of test to see how she would react under pressure? She glanced around the arena, looking for any clue, but everything was as still as stone. There were no enemy targets, no simulated threats, only the cold, lifeless bodies of the instructors and cadets. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something wasn't right. This wasn't part of the test. It couldn't be. Lena swallowed hard and stepped toward Captain Hunter, her eyes never leaving his unmoving figure. She called out his name, her voice shaking slightly. "Captain Hunter," she said, her words echoing in the empty space. "What's happening?" But there was no response. He didn't even blink. Lena's mind raced. She had to act. She couldn't stand here forever, wondering what was going on. She needed to figure out what had happened. Was she the only one alive? Was she dreaming? Had the trial gone wrong? None of it made sense. She turned away from the instructors and scanned the arena again. Her eyes landed on the exit. It was a long way off, past the maze-like walls and debris. She knew that leaving the arena was an option, but it didn't feel right. What if she was missing something? What if there was danger lurking in the shadows? She couldn't just run without knowing what had happened. As her thoughts swirled, she noticed something strange. The walls of the arena, once dark and solid, were now flickering. The lights above her buzzed intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows. It was like the entire arena was glitching, shifting between two different realities. Lena took a deep breath and moved forward, cautiously making her way through the maze. She tried to keep her footsteps as quiet as possible, not knowing if anyone or anything was listening. She had no idea what had caused the instructors to freeze, but she couldn't let her guard down. This wasn't a normal trial. Something else was happening, and it was up to her to figure out what. As she passed a broken crate, she caught sight of something in the corner of her eye. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a flash of something dark and fast, slipping between the shadows. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Her instincts kicked in. She couldn't see what it was, but it was there. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had to find out what it was. Lena crept forward, her eyes scanning the area. She stayed close to the walls, trying to make herself as small as possible. Then there was a sound. A low hum, barely audible, coming from the direction she had seen the movement. It was soft, like an electrical buzz, but it was getting louder. It sounded like machinery. But what kind of machinery? Lena's eyes narrowed as she searched the shadows. Slowly, she reached for the small, stun blaster holstered at her side. The weapon wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She wasn't sure what she was dealing with, but she couldn't take any chances. The hum grew louder, and with it, a low, mechanical whirring sound. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight before her. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its skin was a dark metallic gray, and its eyes glowed a faint, unnatural blue. The creature's body was smooth and sleek, covered in what looked like advanced armor plating. It was an alien. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had read about aliens in her training, but she had never expected to encounter one like this. It was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. This creature was powerful, efficient, and seemed to move with an almost unnatural grace. Lena knew instinctively that it was not here to help. It was here for one reason only, to fight. The alien's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment time seemed to slow. Lena's mind raced. Should she fight? Should she run? What was she supposed to do? The alien raised its arm, and from its wrist a weapon materialized, a glowing energy blade, sharp and deadly. Lena's grip tightened around her blaster. She didn't have much time. She couldn't hesitate. The alien took a step forward, its body moving with swift precision. Lena fired her blaster, the shot hitting the alien square in the chest. But to her shock, the alien didn't even flinch. The blast seemed to dissipate against its armor like it was nothing. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. The alien wasn't just fast, it was practically invulnerable. She fired again, this time aiming for its head, but the alien dodged the shot with ease. It was fast, too fast. It closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, its glowing blade raised high. Lena ducked just in time, feeling the heat of the blade pass inches above her head. She scrambled backward, her mind working at full speed. She needed to get away. She couldn't fight this alien one-on-one, not without help. But before she could take another step, something even stranger happened. The alien suddenly stopped. It stood there, frozen in place, its arm still raised, the blade still glowing. Lena blinked, confused. Was it another trick? Was the alien playing with her? No. She didn't have time to waste. She turned back to the instructors. They were still frozen, not moving, not even breathing. Something had caused this. Something beyond her understanding. A voice crackled through the speakers, low and distorted. Subject 6279. Initiate the sequence. Lena's stomach dropped. She didn't know who or what had spoken those words, but she had a terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever, or whatever, was controlling this situation had bigger plans, plans that included her. With the alien frozen and no other immediate threats, Lena made a snap decision. She needed to find out what was going on. She had to figure out who was behind this and what they wanted. Lena took one last look at the motionless instructors, her breath steadying as she made her way toward the exit. The alien was still frozen in place, but Lena knew that wouldn't last long. She couldn't trust the stillness. Not anymore. She had to move fast. Lena moved quickly, her eyes darting across the arena as she made her way toward the exit. The strange voice from the speakers still echoed in her mind. Subject 6279, initiate the sequence. What did that mean? What was this sequence, and why had it targeted her? She had to find answers, and fast. But the arena was still eerily quiet, and the frozen instructors and cadets only added to the growing sense of dread. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing on her chest as she hurried toward the exit. The air felt heavy, as though it was thick with something dangerous, something unseen. The alien she had seen earlier was still frozen in place, its energy blade glowing faintly in the dim light of the arena. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to stay still for long. And if it wasn't the alien that would attack her next, who or what would it be? She reached the entrance to the arena, but as she stepped forward, something stopped her. A low, mechanical hum echoed from somewhere deep within the walls. The sound was growing louder, and it didn't take long for Lena to realize it wasn't coming from the alien. It was coming from above her. Looking up, she saw the lights flicker once again, and the ceiling of the arena began to shift. Large panels started to slide open, revealing a hidden structure above. From the dark opening, something dropped down, a shadow, sleek and fast, like a darting movement from the corner of her eye. It was another one of them, another alien. But this one wasn't like the first. It didn't have the same sleek, metallic look. Instead, it was bulky and covered in heavy armor. Its limbs were enormous, and its glowing red eyes pierced the darkness, locking onto Lena. It moved slowly at first, but there was a power in its movements that made Lena freeze for a split second. She could tell that this new alien was much stronger than the one she had faced earlier. Her pulse quickened. The alien's eyes never left her as it advanced, its massive steps shaking the ground beneath her feet. Lena instinctively reached for her blaster, but she knew it wasn't going to be enough. Not against something like this. She had to think quickly. She couldn't just stand there and wait to be attacked. She took a deep breath and turned to run. The door, the only exit, was still several meters away. But before she could make it, the alien moved with frightening speed. It swung one of its massive arms, sending Lena crashing into the ground. The air was knocked out of her lungs, and for a moment she struggled to breathe. The alien loomed over her, its enormous shadow covering her body as she lay on the floor. Lena gasped for air, trying to push herself up. Her mind raced. She couldn't let this creature take her. She couldn't let it win, but something happened before the alien could strike again. It froze, just like the first one. Its eyes remained locked on Lena, but it didn't move. The hum from the walls grew louder, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. Was it the same force controlling the aliens? Was it the same voice? What was going on? She pushed herself to her feet, still gasping for air. Her mind was spinning, but she couldn't afford to waste time. She didn't know how long the alien would stay frozen. It could be seconds, it could be minutes, but she had no way of knowing. She had to get out of there, and she had to get answers. Lena sprinted toward the exit again, her footsteps heavy but quick. She didn't stop to look back. She couldn't afford to. She didn't know how many more of those aliens were out there, or if there was something worse waiting for her. She needed to escape, to find a way to survive this nightmare. As she approached the exit, the doors began to close, slowly at first. Panic surged through her. No, 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 she wasn't going to make it out if the doors closed completely. She wasn't going to be trapped in here. She couldn't let that happen. Lena dove for the doors, sliding under them just as they began to close fully. She barely made it through, her arms scraping the metal as she slid into the dark hallway beyond. The sound of the doors closing behind her echoed through the empty space, but she didn't stop. She kept running, her footsteps pounding against the hard floor. The hallway stretched ahead, lit by flickering lights that didn't seem to want to stay on. It was long, narrow, and gave Lena a sense of being trapped. She turned corners, trying to find some sort of control room or security station, somewhere that might explain what was happening. But the further she ran, the more the building seemed to change. The walls began to twist and bend in odd angles, and the floor seemed to shift under her feet. It was like the facility itself was alive. Suddenly, a loud crackle of static broke the silence, and the same voice from the speakers earlier echoed through the hallway. Subject 6279. Proceed to the designated area. The sequence is ready. Lena's blood ran cold. Subject 6279, that was her. She wasn't just part of some test. She was a subject in something much bigger. But what was the sequence, and why was she the one chosen? She had to keep moving. There was no choice. Lena sprinted down the hallway, not sure where it would lead her, but certain of one thing. She couldn't let herself get caught. She couldn't afford to let whatever was controlling this place get its hands on her. She passed a few doors along the hallway, each one leading to empty rooms or darkened storage areas. But one door at the end of the hall seemed different. It was slightly ajar, a dim light flickering from inside. It looked like the kind of room that might contain answers. Lena hesitated for a moment. The voice had told her to go to the designated area. Was this the place it meant? She didn't know, but she couldn't ignore it. She needed to find out what was happening, and she needed to do it fast. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, with walls lined with machines and screens. The soft hum of technology filled the air, and the screens blinked with strange symbols that Lena didn't understand. In the center of the room stood a large console, its surface glowing with a faint blue light. A chair sat next to it, empty but inviting. It almost looked like it was meant for her. Lena's eyes moved over the console, and she saw several buttons, switches, and a few panels that looked like they might open into other parts of the building. But there was no time to figure it all out. She had to act now. She approached the console cautiously, her fingers hovering above the buttons. She didn't know what she was doing, but she had to do something. She couldn't just wait for the sequence to take its course. The voice said the sequence was ready, and that meant she had no time to waste. Lena pressed a button. The room shook slightly, and the hum grew louder. She stared at the screens, waiting for something to happen. A few seconds later, the voice crackled again, but this time it sounded different. It was colder, more mechanical. Sequence initiated. Subject 6279, prepare for Phase 2. Lena's stomach twisted. What did that mean? She didn't have long to think about it, though, because the walls of the room suddenly began to shift. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the console lit up with flashing red lights. The sequence wasn't just a test, it was a trap. And now Lena was right in the middle of it. Lena's heart raced as the room around her seemed to come alive. The walls shifted again, and the tremors beneath her feet grew stronger. She backed away from the console, her mind spinning. What had she just triggered? The voice had said, sequence initiated. Subject 6279, prepare for Phase 2. What did that even mean? And why was she the one in the middle of this nightmare? The flashing red lights made everything feel more urgent, more dangerous. The entire room seemed to be pulsing with energy, the hum of the machines growing louder, almost deafening. Lena tried to steady her breathing, her mind racing to keep up with the situation. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing: she had to get out of here. She spun around, looking for another exit. The door she had entered through was already starting to close, the thick metal sliding down with an almost deliberate slowness. There was no way out that way. Lena turned back to the console. Her eyes scanned the glowing buttons, but she had no idea what any of them did. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. She didn't have time to waste. She had to find a way to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. Without thinking, she slammed her hand down on the nearest button. The lights flickered, and the rumbling stopped for just a moment. But it wasn't enough. A sharp, high-pitched alarm blared from the ceiling, signaling the start of something worse. The walls began to move faster now. Lena's heart thudded in her chest as she backed away from the console. She needed to find an escape route. She couldn't be trapped here. Just then, a loud mechanical noise filled the air. The door at the far end of the room slid open. Lena turned and saw a group of figures entering. They were humans, cadets just like her. But they weren't moving like normal people. Their movements were stiff, robotic, like they were under some sort of control. Lena's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The cadets were frozen at first, standing motionless in the doorway. Then, without warning, they started moving. But it wasn't like they were acting on their own free will. They moved in unison, like they were following orders from some unseen force. Lena took a step back, her pulse quickening. She didn't know what was going on, but it was clear that whatever this sequence was, it was affecting more than just her. It was affecting everyone. The cadets moved forward, their eyes vacant, their faces emotionless. They didn't even acknowledge Lena as they passed by her. It was as if they couldn't see her, or worse, as if they didn't care. She wanted to scream, to run, but she knew that wouldn't solve anything. The voice had said, prepare for Phase 2. What did that mean? Was she supposed to be part of this? Was she just another test subject, like the cadets in front of her? The cadets moved toward the center of the room, where a large, cylindrical device stood. It hummed with energy, its surface covered in strange symbols Lena didn't recognize. The device seemed to pulse with power, and Lena felt a sense of dread creep over her. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't good. She didn't have a choice. Lena had to figure out what was happening, and fast. She couldn't just stand by and let whatever this was take over. She had to stop it. She looked back at the cadets. They were now standing around the device, their faces still blank, their movements robotic. She couldn't help but wonder if they were being controlled by it, if this device was somehow altering their minds, turning them into puppets for whatever force was behind this. Lena knew she couldn't take on the device alone. The cadets were still in her way, and the last thing she needed was to get caught up in whatever was happening to them. She needed a plan. She spotted a maintenance panel along the far wall. It was small and covered in dust, almost as if it had been forgotten. But to Lena, it was a chance. It was a chance to escape, to find a way to stop whatever was controlling the cadets and the facility. She moved quickly, her boots echoing in the silence as she approached the panel. She knelt down, her fingers shaking as she pulled it open. Inside was a series of wires and circuits, nothing she couldn't handle. She had worked on tech before, back on Earth, before joining the academy. It wasn't her specialty, but she knew enough to get by. She grabbed a nearby tool from a small compartment in the panel and began to work, her mind focused. She wasn't going to sit around and wait to become part of this twisted experiment. She had to find a way to stop it. Behind her, the cadets were still standing around the device, their eyes glowing faintly in the low light. Lena didn't dare look back. She had to focus. She couldn't let herself be distracted by the sound of their footsteps, the way they moved in perfect synchronization. With a soft click, the panel popped open, revealing the wires inside. Lena quickly pulled a few loose wires, trying to short-circuit the system. Sparks flew, and the room shook again, but this time it wasn't as strong. She felt a sense of victory, but it was short-lived. The cadets began to move again. Their eyes were now glowing brighter, their bodies twitching as if coming back to life. Lena's heart skipped a beat. The device was still functioning, still in control of them. She cursed under her breath and backed away from the panel. She needed a bigger solution, something more than just disabling the panel. The cadets were becoming more and more active, their movements becoming quicker, more precise. It was only a matter of time before they turned on her. Lena had to think. There had to be a way to break the control, to stop the sequence before it reached its final phase. As she looked around the room, she spotted something, a series of glowing symbols on the walls, running from one end of the room to the other. They were the same strange symbols that covered the device, but this time they were etched into the walls. They glowed with a faint, unnatural light, and Lena realized they were connected somehow. The symbols were part of the sequence. They were what powered the entire system. If she could disable the symbols, maybe she could stop the device. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. Lena quickly scanned the walls, searching for any sign of a control panel or switch that could help her deactivate the symbols. She didn't have much time. The cadets were almost fully animated now, their movements sharp and quick. They were getting closer to her with every passing second. Finally, her eyes landed on a small console built into the wall. It was hidden in a corner, barely noticeable, but it was exactly what she needed. She rushed over to it, ignoring the feeling of the cadets closing in on her. She reached out, pressing a few buttons on the console. The symbols on the walls flickered and began to fade. For a moment she thought she had succeeded, but then the console flashed red and a loud voice boomed from the speakers. Phase 2 is complete. Subject 6279, you are required for the final stage. Lena's blood ran cold. The final stage, what did that mean? The cadets were almost upon her now. Their eyes burned with an intense, unnatural light, and Lena knew that if they reached her, it would be over. She had to act fast. She slammed her fist onto the console, desperation flooding through her. The lights on the wall flickered once more, and the cadets halted in their tracks. Lena didn't waste a second. She grabbed a nearby tool and smashed the console, her mind racing. She didn't know how much time she had left, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let this place control her. The walls began to shake again, but this time it was different. The rumbling was deeper, more violent. The air crackled with energy, and Lena could feel the power of the facility pulling at her. It wasn't over yet, but she wasn't giving up. Not now, not when she was so close to stopping it all. He told her that she failed the combat trial, then noticed the instructors weren't moving sci-fi.